Hi everyone, wonderful to see everyone popping up online. Thanks so much for joining. While we're waiting for attendees to get online, we'll give them a couple more minutes. But to kind of start the conversation, if you're interested, maybe pop in the chat where is your favorite blue carbon location, and a short description why. It'd be wonderful to learn about blue carbon locations around the world. Clarendon, Jamaica. That sounds like somewhere I would love to visit. Bay of Assassins, thank you, Lalau. Welcome to the conversation, Mohammed. Puerto Rico, another location on my bucket list. Well, thank you for sharing those locations. So I think we've got a really good audience on board. So I'll kick things off. So hello everyone. My name is Leah Glass. I'm a technical blue carbon technical advisor with Blue Ventures, which is a member of the International Partnership for Blue Carbon, and I also sit on the IPBC's technical focal group. As the moderator of today's event, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the IPBC's first knowledge exchange session. So the goal of these sessions is to encourage the sharing of experience and lessons learned related to blue carbon across the partnership's many members. The first event today is going to focus on some of the lessons learned from blue carbon restoration and conservation projects across the world that were designed to lead to the generation of carbon credits for trade on the voluntary carbon market. There will be two main parts for today's webinar. It'll be a panel discussion followed by a Q&A session. I really encourage you as we go through the panel discussion to use the Q&A function in Zoom to post questions, and we'll do our best to get through all of the questions by the end of the hour. To help set up what I really hope will be a fulfilling Q&A session, we've got an incredible panel of speakers brought together to give us an overview of the topic. So without further ado, I will introduce them and get going. So joining us today, we have Nicole Diana from the Directorate of Marine, Coastal and Aquatic Resources at the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Colombia. Also joining us from Colombia, we have Maria Claudia Diaz-Grandos, who is the Blue Carbon Director at Conservation International in Colombia. One of the most exciting blue carbon projects to hit the market over the last few years is in Colombia. So I'm really excited to learn more about this today from Nicole and Maria Claudia. We also have Amy Schmidt, who is the Manager of Blue Carbon Innovations at Veras, who managed the Verified Carbon Standard, or VCS, which is one of the standards that blue carbon projects can use to verify their carbon credits. And from another of those standards, we also have Ava Schuch, who is the Projects Manager and oversees country strategies at the PlanVivo Foundation, which coordinates the PlanVivo standard. Steve Crooks from Sylvester Climate Associates, who's also a fellow member of the IPBC focal group with myself, was really hoping to join the discussion today. However, he is deep in the mangroves on a field mission in Suriname. Steve has been involved in the blue carbon sector right from the start. So he's got some really interesting experience to bring to the discussion. So to help frame today's discussion, earlier he recorded this overview of the current status of blue carbon projects globally. And it's better if you're able to share the video.
Hi everybody, if you're watching this video, it's because I'm in the field today and I have no cell reception. And actually, in fact, it's pouring outside, and so it's going to be a very wet day in the mangroves indeed, which I'm sure you can appreciate that experience, and definitely not good for making videos. So I've been asked the question, what is the status of blue carbon these days? And as I look back and reflect on where we've come over more than 10 years now, back at the beginning, as many of us were working on this issue, there wasn't any NDC, there was no Paris Climate Agreement. We didn't have the IPBC wetland supplement to help countries recognize the emissions and removals associated with better management of coastal wetlands. And there were no real market mechanisms. The VCS methodologies and similar did not exist. There were no finance institutions. There were no blue bonds, etc. But now a lot of these things are in place, and we're seeing what's been a gradual ramping up in terms of interventions. Countries are stepping forward with pretty strong ambitions related to conservation and restoration of coastal ecosystems. We're seeing projects come online. Initially there were a few smaller projects in Mexico, Madagascar, Kenya, which began to show the way at the community level. And then we started getting larger projects. It took a while. The projects we're going to talk about in Colombia today. And then in Pakistan, massive replanting. I like to say this, it is 1 billion trees of mangroves that are going to be replanted in the Indus Delta of the project. And when that project's now transacting its first roughly 3 million tons. And so we're looking forward to that project and similar projects continuing on. So there's a lot of financing right now. This is the new world, at least as we see it. There is a lot of financing chasing projects, and there's very few projects in the pipeline. And so this is part of the reason why I'm going to be standing in the rain today, looking at a potential project, and why we've been on the road constantly for the last year now, and it's unceasing, is looking for potentially good projects that we can bring to fruition. What we're also seeing is that there's a much greater push for jurisdictional scale projects. There's an interest in projects 10,000, 20,000, much larger, if we can find them. That's challenging. But what we're also seeing recently is an appropriate increase in the price of carbon credits. Just a couple of years ago, we were thinking, well, $10 a ton, that would be a good price, then 15. But now we're seeing examples of transactions in the upper 20s into the 30s and even $40 a ton. And so hopefully that trend will continue, because that allows more types of projects to come online. Because as we move forward, there's going to be more infrastructure involved in hydrological restoration of some of these areas. So it's looking very promising. But fairly soon, I think we're going to be seeing all the easier projects will be taken up, and we're going to be getting into more complicated projects that require more complicated finance mechanisms to move forward. We still face challenges. Restoration projects are relatively easier than conservation projects. We struggle. We were in Brazil just a few weeks ago, and there is the beautiful mangroves heavily impacted by gradual encroachment of urban development along the shoreline. It's very difficult to include those in carbon financing and develop mechanisms for that. So we need to find a solution for that. It still remains difficult on conservation projects to develop the baseline scenario where you have a situation where there's very little change taking place, and then all of a sudden there's sudden change. We have real difficulty in tackling that issue. But on a positive side, we're also expanding, potentially the range of blue carbon ecosystems. And there's a lot of interest in the science is growing, just like it grew with the traditional blue carbon ecosystems. We're now looking at seascapes and trying to work out where seaweeds, where seabed management and other types of seascape management, like marine protected areas, much as we manage landscapes, fit into climate mitigation actions. So stay tuned to that. So lots going on. It's a very exciting time, and I look forward to hearing more of the discussions taking place. Thank you.
That was a brilliant overview from Stephen. Really sets up the discussion well, and looking forward to delving into the subject a little bit deeper with the panelists. So Amy, I think I'll start off with you. So Vera has developed various pathways for blue carbon projects to access the market that, as Steve says, has been growing exponentially recently. Can you give us an overview of how Vera serves the blue carbon space?
Sure, and hi everyone. It's great to be able to speak with all of you today. So there are a few different ways that the programs that we manage at Vera can serve the blue carbon space. So the first is under the Verified Carbon, or VCS program, and this is the world's most widely used voluntary greenhouse gas program. And under this program, we have a number of methodologies that support tidal wetland conservation and restoration activities, so including mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marshes. And so projects can be developed today using those methodologies to earn carbon credits or VCUs, which can then be sold on the open market. We also have a couple of other programs that can be used or could be used to support blue carbon activities. So the first is our jurisdictional and nested RED program. And so this program also allows jurisdictional action to be able to receive carbon credits. And it's really focused on government-led action, either at the national or subnational level. So currently it focuses on forests, but in many cases, mangroves can meet the definition of forests and could be included within a jurisdictional RED program. And we're also considering whether to update that program to kind of better support blue carbon activities, since in many cases, the drivers and kind of trends that we see with deforestation kind of at the national or subnational level are really appropriate for terrestrial forests and may not fully kind of translate for mangroves, even if they can be included. And then the final program that I'll mention is our Sustainable Development Verified Impact Standard, or SD-VISTA. And this program is really focused on allowing projects to be able to certify their contributions to the SDGs. And one thing that is optional for projects to be able to do is to quantify and issue non-carbon assets related to their sustainable development benefits. And so one of the first methodologies that's being developed under the SD-VISTA program will allow blue carbon projects to also certify their coastal resilience benefits and issue this as a separate credit along with a carbon credit if they choose to do so. So I know that's a lot of information at once, so I have a few links that I can put in the chat if anyone is interested in kind of taking a deeper dive into any of the programs I just mentioned.
Fantastic, thank you, Amy. Yeah, it's been really interesting and reassuring to watch, to kind of watch Vera evolve and support the growing interest from the investment side and also the project development side in blue carbon and helping us think through how can this actually look like on the ground. And as you say, marrying those larger scale projects with some of the smaller scale pilot projects is really interesting. So someone that has really been through this process and has a huge wealth of experience to share with us is Maria Claudia. So you and your partners led the development of the world's first blue carbon conservation project certified under the VCS that Amy just gave us an overview of. Can you share with us a little bit about what this project looks like on the ground?
Thank you, Leah. I'm sure I can share with you a couple of tips, but first, can you hear me well? There is a lot of background noise around me. Is the sound okay?
Yes, can hear you very well.
Excellent. So yes, as you mentioned, CI in close partnership with national authorities, the National Marine Research Institute, a national NGO called Omacha Foundation, and 14 local community-based associations developed a project called Vida Manglar, which is pioneering the new methodologies to measure greenhouse gas emissions from mangrove conservation in the Colombian Caribbean coast. Our approach is based on conserving mangrove allowing natural regeneration of the forest and at the same time developing livelihoods, sustainable management, and strengthening local governments in 3 protected areas of this region in Colombia. The project was certified last year by Veras under BCS and CCP. It has an area of approximately 8,700 hectares of mangrove forest, where key endangered species are present. Cispata was the first protected area included in the first phase of this group project. And right now we are starting the expansion phase by adding 2 additional mangrove patches called Caimanera and Guacamayas. Within the whole project, there are approximately 12,000 inhabitants living in and around mangroves. Some of them are in extreme poverty who make direct use of the natural resources from within the mangrove. The area is threatened by many different factors. One of those is cattle and buffalo farming that are common through the area and are causing physical disturbance to the mangrove forest. The lack of infrastructure for the development of activities related to tourism and inadequate training are also prominent causes of mangrove degradation in the area. And finally, climate-related issues like flooding along the year and erosion are also causing significant damages to the environment. Even if those areas are somehow protected, as they are called protected areas, as I just mentioned, the lack of long-term funding is affecting the implementation of management plan. And so the natural capital may be affected. That is the reason why we decided to create Vida Manglar, which is basically designed to offer additional funding to recover mangrove forests, ensuring biodiversity conservation inside the region and promoting sustainable economic activities to local communities in order to reduce negative direct impacts on the ecosystem. That's a very, very brief summary of the project we have right now in Colombia.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Maria Clara. Really interesting to learn more about that project. And obviously the government of Colombia was a very key partner in the development of that project. And yeah, Nicole, it's great to have you on the call today. I understand that you're in the field, so your connection is a little bit weak, but it would be really great if you could share a little bit about yeah, the government of Colombia's involvement in this project, and how do you see mangrove conservation and restorations programs within the country moving forward as blue carbon initiatives? What value, what added value do you feel Vida Manglar brings to the national plans?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. From the Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development, specifically the Directorate of Marine, Coastals and Aquatic Resource Affairs, we have been an active part of the project since the beginning. The regional autonomous corporation are part of the Mangrove Life initiative, making presence and accompaniments. Mangrove Life is a clear example of how we can contribute to the conservation of coastal marine ecosystem in this country and how I can be applied in other parts of the world. Currently, this project has become a model to follow in various regions of Colombia that would like to protect the habitats of a great diversity of species in the future. From the minister, we lead different projects to be more resilient to the current change that arise from the president's contributing to carbon neutrality and prioritizing the well-being of local communities, and one that the different sectors and territories have the necessary capacities to adapt to the climate change, with the purpose of advancing in the future that we want in Colombia and the whole world. This is why the Colombian government asks the project to include new areas in different regions of the country.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing that. And it's been really exciting to watch the development of this project and the success it's seen on the ground. But certainly from my own personal experience, I know it's definitely not easy. Maria, Claudia, coming back to you, what lessons have you learned from developing this project? What would be your key advice for people out there that are also interested in developing a blue carbon project?
Yes, Leah, I'm sorry. But before I respond to your question, I want to add just a little comment on what Nicole just mentioned. For Vida Manglar partners, it was very important. A key aspect of developing this program was the support from the national government. So right now we have the full endorsement from the National Ministry of Environment through regional environmental authorities. That is one of the major success I can see, or we have within this long process that we are right now walking. And going back to your question, developing a project like Vida Manglar to obtain this internationally validated carbon certification is not a simple path at all. We understand that this project is unlocking the mechanism for carbon credits, which are globally scalable and can cause significant transformation in ocean and conservation. As Steve was just mentioning a couple of minutes ago, we are selling credits with high price, but it requires a lot of information, collaborative work between different stakeholders, alignment of objectives between public and private actors, as well as a transparent and participatory internal negotiation process. Even if this sounds easy, every single step is a challenge for all of us. And this project has a very complex governance structure, which I don't see it as a mistake. On the contrary, it's a strength for this project. And I always believe that all that we are doing is not because we want to have credits at the end, but because we are trying to do something to combat climate change and to give sustainability to the actors that are around these mangrove forests. So these create a long-term process, and sometimes we are focused only on short-term projects. So changing or making this shift in our mindset is very challenging as well, and that is one of the lessons I can extract from this process, together with this partnership between public and private stakeholders. And finally, I believe that we should add always adaptation components to these blue carbon projects that are focused on mitigation, and explore opportunities to certify or find additional benefits and value them as well, in order to increase the value of these areas and sell it in a market, not only the carbon one, but in a different market, to guarantee that we will have financial support from many different investors, companies, etc. So these are a couple of lessons learned I extract from this process. And again, replicating this model in different locations is what we are trying to do within CI, but we understand that it's not easy. There needs to be a lot of different pieces of the same puzzle, and in some cases, this is the best or the biggest challenge we may have.
Really interesting. Thank you, Maria Claudia, for sharing those lessons. And I think it's the more sessions we can have like this, where where people are talking openly about both the opportunities and the challenges and the lessons learned from these projects as they increasingly develop, I think is really key to scaling the sector sustainably and successfully. And I think that piece, you're mentioning about the complexity and the time, and and everything that goes into creating these multifaceted projects, because mangroves are multifaceted ecosystems, and they inherently encourage what they need, complex, well thought through projects. So the more, particularly from that investment side, I think it's very, really important that these lessons are shared, and that there is the understanding from the investor side that these projects, just demonstrated how much time and effort and thought and partnership development went into the development of Vida Mangla. So thank you for that. Moving on to Ava. So one of the projects that's really kind of like spawned this whole revolution, and the world's first blue carbon project in Kenya was certified under the PlanVivo standard. Can you tell us a little bit about what is the PlanVivo standard, and what have you learned from working with blue carbon projects over the last decade?
Yeah, glad to. Thank you very much, Leah, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel here today. So I'll start with just a brief introduction to the PlanVivo standard for those of you who are not familiar with us. So PlanVivo is a voluntary carbon standard. We're actually the longest standing voluntary carbon standard in the voluntary carbon market, with our origins dating back to the early 90s. And so we look back on more than 25 years of experience, particularly with smallholder and community-based forest carbon projects, which is sort of the only activities that PlanVivo currently certifies. And in terms of blue carbon projects, we have 3 registered blue carbon projects, 2 in Kenya and 1 in Madagascar. And as Leah mentioned, the first blue carbon project in Kenya was certified by PlanVivo back in 2014. And we've got 5 more blue carbon projects in development currently. So as a standard, we really have sort of like a 3-pronged approach where we focus on climate benefits, but also people and nature. And while, we obviously look after the legitimacy of carbon accounting of projects, making sure that climate benefits or carbon benefits can be demonstrated as real, additional, and unique, we have a very strong focus and holistic model that looks at generating long-term livelihoods and biodiversity benefits as well. So we see carbon credits really as an enabler to generate and provide long-term livelihoods and biodiversity benefits. And we mainly do this through 2 tools, one being the standard itself, which is very much focused on a participatory component, participatory development involving communities and smallholders. So really creating community ownership, meaning that projects are designed to keep local contexts in mind and really centering local communities' voice and agency. And secondly, through our benefit sharing mechanism, which sees that 60% of income from carbon credits has to be channeled back through communities. And what we normally see is that communities invest back into the communities. So really generating long-term livelihood benefits, such as investing in, let's say, community infrastructure or water pumps, or maybe providing microloans or investing in educational resources. I mean, it's a breadth of things and depends on the local context of the actual project where it's situated. And we've seen that blue carbon projects are a really great match for this model, because mostly we are working with sort of local fishing communities, very often small scale fishing communities that are really dependent on coastal ecosystems to uphold their livelihoods. And that brings me sort of to our learning that we've had with blue carbon projects, in particular over the last decade. And I'm going to repeat a couple of points that Maria Claudia has already mentioned, which is in a way great that we've had the same lessons learned. But I think one big thing is that blue carbon projects can meet multiple objectives, which Maria Claudia has already mentioned. So of course, they're often set up as climate change mitigation projects, but really they have multiple benefits. So they can achieve SDG agendas, adaptation targets, and also biodiversity targets. So these projects really are multifaceted and can just generate a very large range of benefits. And as such, I think that's a good thing to keep in mind if maybe the discussion moves on to funding as well, because I think there could be multiple funding streams for these types of projects. Secondly, I talked about community participation being a sort of key component of the PlanVivo standard. And we've definitely seen that these projects need to be designed really keeping the local contexts in mind, and also really addressing the opportunity costs of transitioning to conservation or restoration type projects. So creating alternative income streams for community members. And we've seen that that can really increase a sense of ownership for the community, and therefore really foster sustainable management of these natural resources in the long term beyond just, you know, carbon payment or carbon projects. But that brings me to part 3, which Claudia has already touched on as well, which is having a really good multi-stakeholder collaborative approach. So we've seen in most of our projects that strong links to government are really important to clarify land tenure or user rights, which are often not entirely clear in coastal ecosystems, and also making sure that there's an enabling policy landscape and creating funding mechanisms for these types of projects. And at the same time, we've seen that strong links to research institutions and NGOs are also very important in terms of supporting these projects and aligning with best practice, and also building the capacity of local people on the ground. And then obviously the last piece in this puzzle piece of multi-stakeholders are the investors, which can really make sure that any benefits or, you know, well, finance mechanisms really benefit the local people on the ground. So yeah, that's just a quick summary.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ava. Really interesting. Yeah, and it's interesting as well to see common threads already kind of like developing through the conversation, particularly this, you know, this more than carbon, this adaptation piece, the importance of real, tangible, equitable local engagement, and of course the opportunities posed by partnerships and the importance of them, but also some of the time involved in developing those partnerships. So back to Amy, I'm finding this kind of perspective from the standard really quite interesting. So from the perspective of BCS or Vera, what advice would you give to potential project developers, whether they be governments, NGOs, the private sector, that may be interested in developing blue carbon projects?
Yeah, so I think my answer to this question will also touch on a few points that Ava and Maria Claudia have already made. One of the biggest things that we've heard has been really being able to engage, if you're not a government, being able to engage with the relevant government entities who may have some control over coastal ecosystems is really important. And then also engaging with local communities who may use those ecosystems or have kind of traditional rights or use of them. I think another kind of piece of advice that I would say as a standard setting organization is just related to the complexity of developing a blue carbon project. So a lot of times I like to think of, especially for like a conservation project, it's almost like developing a forestry project plus all of this added complexity because it's a wetland and the ecosystem is connected to other ecosystems. And there are things that need to be taken into account because of that. And so I think having kind of a lot of data availability can be important, either if that's from the government level or from research institutions, but also being able to connect with those different groups to be able to do the monitoring or the field work that's needed to understand the hydrological connectivity of the ecosystem, or develop a baseline, which can be complex in certain situations for conservation projects.
Brilliant, thank you, Amy. Yeah, it's a really interesting time to be in the sector. There's, as Steve mentioned in his opening address, the level of interest from the investment sector really is phenomenal right now, and there's huge amount of potential to really have tangible impact on the ground, both ecologically and socially. And I think this is it's such a unique time to be part of the blue carbon space. But as all three of you have touched on, there certainly are some challenges that still need to be not necessarily overcome, but worked through, so that kind of like future blue carbon initiatives have an easier go. And the current issue of the demand from the investment side far exceeding the supply of blue carbon, quality blue carbon credits, is overcome. So to kind of wrap this panel discussion and head into the Q&A, I'd just like to ask you one more thing. So the IPBC is obviously a broad partnership with plenty of government members as well as NGO members. What, in your opinion, is one thing, so just one thing that we can do as a partnership to ensure that more high quality blue carbon projects are able to access the investment and the finance that is out there right now? I think I'll start with Maria Claudia, if that's okay.
That's a difficult question. Just one thing, perhaps helping creating perhaps capacity building program or institute or something that increases the capacity worldwide and different stakeholders, not only at local level, but also at policy level. What we learn in this path is that we also need to train or need to help training people from government, from organization, making them understanding what is blue carbon, why is this important, why we should work all together towards conserving or restoring these ecosystems, and how these ecosystems can be embedded or included in policy mechanisms. So I think capacity is key. I have seen in many countries lack of capacity, and that is one of the limitations we are having right now to develop high quality blue carbon projects in different geographies.
It's a really great point. And yeah, it's something that the partnership is really well placed to support. Thank you, Maria Claudia. Ava, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, thank you. And again, great that Maria Claudia was saying exactly the same thing that I was thinking, which was capacity building and specifically keeping local people in mind, I think, and really I guess not ignoring that sort of community ownership and taking sort of like a human rights approach and a social justice approach is quite important, I think. And I think capacity building is a strong component for that, to really make sure that communities have access to technical resources and are able to participate in monitoring and activities that demonstrate compliance. But I think, if I may, Leah, sorry, I'm going off script here, but I saw also a good question in the Q&A, which I think is also like a good outcome of this partnership, which was, do you think there's a value in determining an agreed set of values for restoration work that goes beyond carbon? If we're not presenting a united message, the financiers will maybe get confused. And I think that's a really good point and a great aim for a partnership. I think there are so many good case studies out there that can demonstrate what makes a high quality blue carbon credit. And I think it's very important to learn from those and maybe share also amongst the members, like what makes a good carbon project and how can those be supported.
Fantastic, thank you, Ava. Yeah, there's it's really great to see the sector to be at that point where we are kind of like thinking about this and thinking about it properly. You know, obviously it would be great to address the demand, but ensuring that this demand is addressed with high quality credits. And what does this look like? There's a lot of thinking going on across the sector at the moment, and yeah, it's really great that these conversations are happening right now. Whitney, I'm not sure if I think you were on the call. If you want to add anything into the chat about some of the conversations that you're leading, please do feel free. And David also from the Australian government raised a really important point about the Blue Carbon Accelerator Fund. That is an initiative run through IUCM and is really designed as a mechanism that will help support this, you know, this increase in capacity and investment. And there's a link in the chat for anyone that's interested about that. So lastly, Amy, what is your one thing?
Yeah, I think the points that Maria Claudia and Ava made were really important. So the one thing that I was thinking of is kind of a cop-out because it really includes multiple things. So I was thinking of just having the enabling conditions that are needed for carbon project development or for ecosystem restoration and conservation. And so this could include many different things, including capacity building, but also including data availability, or kind of local or national or international policy that helps to support these really important activities. So I think, like I said, that's actually multiple things, but really kind of thinking of what needs to be in place to have action on the ground.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amy. And really, again, thank you so much to the panelists for that really fantastic discussion. It's definitely stimulated some excellent questions in the Q&A. So for the remaining 15-20 minutes, we'll move over to the questions and answers. Again, thanks everyone for asking your questions. If you've got any more, please do feel free to pop them in. It's really interesting to see seagrass pop up in one question. So there was one question about seagrass and whether there are examples of seagrass projects, particularly addressed to you, Amy, but also Ava, Maria, Claudia. I'm sure you may be aware of other initiatives going on within your network. Amy, what seagrass projects are you aware of at the moment?
Yeah, so we currently don't have any seagrass projects that are registered or issuing credits yet, but I am aware of a seagrass restoration project that is under development using the VCS program. And so this project is based in the United States, and it's for seagrass restoration. So they're able to kind of add on to an ongoing research study and expand into a new area of seagrass restoration that they're hoping to be able to get carbon credits for under the VCS program. And we've heard interest from other groups who are also working with seagrass, and I know that there are some additional challenges to developing seagrass projects compared to mangroves, which I think are more commonly seen right now for blue carbon. And a lot of them are related to the kind of the drivers of ecosystem degradation with seagrass ecosystems, which would be important to understand and address in either a conservation or a restoration project, and that those drivers of ecosystem degradation can actually be pretty difficult for a project to address. Oftentimes they're things like water quality or water temperature, which is occurring from kind of an upstream source.
Really interesting. Yeah, thank you, Amy. And I think, yeah, it also links to, you know, so much of our experience from the carbon market and the carbon market space comes from terrestrial ecosystems. So adapting that for use in ecosystems which are largely covered by water is yeah, certainly not an easy thing, but it's exciting to see things moving forward. Ava, do you have anything you want to add to this question?
Yeah, just like Amy just mentioned, similar at PlanVivo, we don't have a registered seagrass project, but one of our mangrove conservation projects, Vanga, they're sister projects, that's why sometimes I confuse them, but it's Vanga, Blue Forest, and they are currently trialing a seagrass intervention, but it's not currently accredited under PlanVivo because I think the idea is very much to treat it as a pilot, you know, monitor for a couple of years to see also how it could maybe be more sort of like a community-based intervention. And so they're trialing that currently, and Amy mentioned some of the challenges related. So that pilot is very much looking at, you know, involving the local community, how could some of these challenges be addressed, but it is not currently accredited and it's not a methodology, it's more sort of like an ongoing research project by the project coordinator.
Yeah, completely. No, it's yeah, it's great to hear of these initiatives, and it's, you know, there's two parallel angles going on at the moment. You know, there's a lot of really fantastic talk about looking kind of like beyond carbon and beyond this kind of like hyper focus on climate change mitigation and including adaptation, as Maria, Claudia and the rest of you mentioned, but also kind of it's really beyond mangroves as well. Seems to be the trajectory right now within the blue carbon space. A really interesting question came from Kathleen. So it's kind of really about the future of blue carbon projects in light of climate change. How is climate change going to impact the carbon sequestration potential of some of these projects? And yeah, how what impact are they going to have going forward on these initiatives? Maria, Claudia, I'm not sure if you got any thoughts on this one.
So is the last question that Kathleen is asking?
Yes. Yeah.
So
yeah.
how will climate change impact carbon sequestration? Yep.
Yes.
Well, in the case of mangroves, which is what we are focusing on right now, even if we are developing a couple of other projects with salt marshes and potential seagrasses, I believe that if climate change, I don't call it right now climate change, I call it climate crisis, because we are in a crisis. And if we don't do anything right now to stop the increase of temperatures, everything is going to change in the near future. So we are trying to do our best to try at least managing one of the multiple causes that are affecting our climate globally. And in this case is restoring mangrove forests that, you know, have more potential to sequester greenhouse gases. But on the other hand, we need to stop emitting those gases. And that's another challenge we have, and we need to also work all together in order to solve that. So I don't have a clear answer to your question. I don't know if Amy or Eva can complement this, but at least we are doing something right now. We are making our effort to conserve the forests we have right now, to restore what is being lost due to anthropogenic causes, and to help communities, which are basically humans that are relying on these forests to try alternative economic sources of income. So we are doing what we can, at least from our perspective, but we also need to work and help others to work and solve the other causes of these climate crisis we are living on.
Really salient points. Yeah, Maria, Claudia, thank you. Yeah, no, really, really important points. And I think again, it touches on that the unique aspect of these ecosystems is that, you know, they're obviously incredibly important for mitigation, but they're also important for adaptation. So again, that piece comes out. Amy and Ava, if there's time as well, these are obviously really important points for carbon projects to think about as they develop, particularly from the perspective of permanence of the carbon stocks that they are either protecting or restoring. I know it's a big question, and there's a lot of thinking going on within the standards and their kind of technical working groups at the moment regarding this. But can you give like maybe just a quick overview regarding where some of the ways in which the standards support projects to think about this component?
Sure, I can start. So one of the biggest impacts that we see as a potential threat to blue carbon ecosystems is sea level rise. And so all of our blue carbon projects that are certified under VCS are required to take expected sea level rise and the impacts on the ecosystems into account. So for example, if there's the potential for ecosystem migration, or if there's not the potential for that and there could be carbon stock loss. And then beyond that, we are actually in the process of updating the non-permanence risk tool under our program. And this tool allows projects to assess their risks of non-permanence for carbon credits. And we're currently updating it to incorporate an assessment of projected future climate change impacts and also sea level rise within that tool. So all blue carbon and non-blue carbon land-based projects will be required to project the potential increase in risk due to future climate impacts. And then one last thing that I'll mention is kind of, I think with blue carbon ecosystems, we really have almost like two ways that they could help this climate crisis. So one is obviously with the emission reductions or removals that they could generate. And obviously they could also be kind of at threat from climate change. but also they're really important for kind of climate change adaptation and reducing the impacts from sea level rise or reducing the impacts from coastal flooding. And so there's so many benefits that they have. And I know that Steve Crooks is even starting to work with some folks who are looking into potential ocean alkalinity benefits from coastal ecosystems. So potential ways that they could combat even ocean acidification. So I think even though blue carbon ecosystems could be at risk from sea level rise or from climate change, they are such important ecosystems for addressing climate change or adapting to it as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely, Amy. Yeah, great points. Ava, I know PlanVivo certainly put a strong focus on this resilience piece and this adaptation piece. Have you got anything you'd like to add to this question?
Yeah, just maybe adding on, I think one important thing to also keep in mind that projects are dynamic as well, and in the environments that they're situated in. So I think one important thing to keep in mind is like a project that you design now goes through an evolution. It might have to deal with challenges and challenges along the way. So a project has to adapt as well. And I think one is obviously this strong focus on at least a PlanVivo on this participatory design to really also determine all the potential risks. And that's obviously something that needs to be reassessed as well, especially specifically when projects go through verifications and annual reviews by the standards, really assessing whether there are any material risks to the project and how the projects respond to that. So I think that's an important piece to mention here. And as you mentioned, Leah, and also just building on what I said earlier, I think projects also evolve. So the resilience piece is really built into projects that have this sort of like participatory approach in terms of building resilience against climate change or sea level rise, et cetera, but also community activities and what the project channels funding into can also adapt along the way. So I think that's an important piece to keep in mind, that projects aren't necessarily static, but also need to evolve and adapt to challenges. And at PlanVivo, we really believe in this concept of adaptive management and put procedures for that in place so projects are able to respond to challenges as they come up.
Yeah, very true. Mangroves are, as you say, mangroves are dynamic and communities are dynamic. And yeah, I think the carbon, the framework and the thinking that is required in order to develop a carbon project, I think is a really useful way to support collaborations, partnerships, to really think about how to address some of these kind of like core drivers and opportunities and challenges. So yeah, really great points. I think we've only got about 5 minutes left, but I did find, yeah, David, thank you for your question on this values piece, and Ava, you've obviously already touched on this in one of your previous answers, but I guess to kind of like wrap the discussion, we'd be really interested in about a minute, if possible, just to hear from your perspective, I guess one key principle as far as you see of a successful, of a high quality blue carbon project. So, what's kind of like one value of a high quality blue carbon project? Maria, Claudia, is it okay if I'll start with you?
Well,
sorry.
I believe that quality criteria include a lot of different components. In particular, I stress out the way we work together with local communities and how we are able to transfer benefits directly to them. Because at the end, we can design the project, we can help them move forward with action plans, management plans, etc. But they are the one that does conservation or restoration in the area. So they are obviously resource users, they rely on those ecosystems, so they need to be benefited directly from these long-term funding mechanisms or solutions. So that's one of the key aspects of a high quality project, is the way they are, it is planned, transferring benefit, like making the benefit sharing mechanism really transparent, and making sure that the majority of the funds derived from these processes goes directly back into the community. That's one key aspect for me.
Thank you, Maria Claudia. And that really closely links as well to Ava's, your point earlier about that opportunity cost piece, which is so important. Thank you, Maria Claudia. Ava, what do you see as one kind of like key value of a high quality blue carbon project?
Yeah, I'm glad that Maria Claudia already mentioned benefit sharing and also safeguards. So I won't touch on that again because that's already been mentioned. I think I'm just going to touch on what I said earlier around adaptive management, specifically in view of working with communities. So really making sure there are ongoing feedback mechanisms, ongoing reassessment of stakeholders, ongoing reassessments of risks, etc., to make sure that the project really has a full picture of the context of potential risks, but also of the needs and of the community. Like I said, things evolve over time and community priorities might also shift over time. So really being able to respond to that and having a really strong link on the ground.
Thank you, Eva, completely, yeah. And Amy, to finish with you before we wrap.
Yeah, I think to just kind of add the standard setting perspective, I think having high quality measurements of the credits, ensuring that you're not overstating the emission reductions or removals that are being claimed, and that they do represent permanent emission reductions or removals, especially from kind of the voluntary space. We are seeing a real push from a lot of different organizations around the quality of credits. And so I think, you know, being able to have more certainty and kind of more accuracy with the measurements is really important.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and really to wrap, I just want to say a massive thank you to the panelists. That was a really fascinating discussion. I hope from an audience perspective you learned something and found it a rewarding discussion. Thank you so much for taking part, to all of you. The recording will be available online shortly. And I guess the one last thing I wanted to say is please keep an eye out. This is the first in what is going to be a series of sessions from the IPBC. And yeah, there'll be an announcement coming out over the coming months. But as we hit the hour, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for participating in what's been a really interesting discussion. And I'm looking forward to the next one in the series.
Thank you very much. It's been great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.